I mean, basically, things will happen. So yes, we are now officially live, Nandita.
Yay!
Yeah. So
We are all live. I'm feeling it.
we're feeling it good. Yes. My lab is here. Tara has decided that she prefers the air conditioning to to being in the on the bed.
Can we blame her for that?
We can't really not. But yes. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining in. We're going to take a couple of minutes to let some of the people kind of get added into this chat. I don't know how that happens. Like, I don't know what the process is, but I know slowly people keep coming in.
Yeah. I can see the attendees,
Yeah.
increasing. I
So
feel like, yeah.
yeah, it's like this moment of anticipation. You're just waiting and saying, oh, who else is joining in? Are people coming? So we usually give it a couple of minutes
Sure.
and then we'll get straight into the conversation. For those of you joining in now, hi and welcome to another round of Guftgu. We're very happy to have Nandita Raman in conversation today. Nandita is joining us from the States, so it's super early over there, I imagine. And
9:30. So that's
9:30.
not that early.
Not that early, but we had you run off to your studio in the morning and like, so thank you for joining us, Nandita.
It's good. It's a good practice that you are forcing me to
Am I forcing some
like change my habit and
discipline
get up.
onto your morning routine?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so Vasif is here. Hi, Vasif. I was just telling Nandita how you're going to hopefully join us on this chat. And so just for those of you who are joining us for the first time, hi, I'm Anshika and I am the founder of this little experiment called Offset Projects. At Offset, I mean, I just got interested in photo books and I had a growing photo book library, which I then decided to do little pitara pop-ups with. So that's how we started with the book form, where we would literally take a trunk full of photo books and plop them into schools or universities or different cities and slowly festivals. And we've just had a lot of people come and spend time with the books that a lot of photographers, some of whom are in our attendees, end up creating. And one of the things that started with that actually was that after we saw people engage with books, and actually people would come and spend hours sometimes or come back to see the same books again, we started the whole idea of Guftgu, which was, let's talk about how you feel, let's talk about what impact that book had on a dream you might have had or even outside of it. And that's how Guftgu started. And up until Feb or March earlier this year, it was more of a physical entity because it was a nice way to kind of get people together, photographers, non-photographers, academics, non-academics, and just talk about what a book can feel like to hold, and through that process maybe even start understanding what that medium does for photography and for us as individuals. And then obviously COVID came in and we were like, what do we do now? And I am not a very technologically friendly person, but I still had these books and I said, maybe we can try and do this, which has actually helped me get you on board, because otherwise I would have probably had to wait to see when you'd be in India next, Nandita, and then figure out when we can meet and how we can collect people. But we seem to be doing that sitting in our home and you in your studio. So I think it's working out quite well, in that front. But thanks so much for joining us. And thank you for agreeing to kind of talk about, of course, the book that you have made, books that you are currently in the process of figuring out, and also how the entire journey of, well, not just photography, because you've expanded from photography into video and object-based art as well, which I'm very curious to know more of too. Just to give people a little bit of a context, I had first heard of Nandita's work, and I had done a magazine interview with her when I was an intern, I think about a decade ago now. I can't remember, but it was a really long time back.
It's a long time back, isn't
It
it?
was really, really long. I mean, definitely around 2010, if not earlier. And that was like
Mm.
my internship job. So I was super excited, and we spoke about the cinema work, which I believe is still ongoing.
Mm.
And that's quite exciting to know how
Yeah,
it.
the work is done, but well, I've just begun working on a book
Right, right.
that kind of translate that work into the book space.
Right, which was always so funny because I was talking to Saurabh, who's also a friend, and we were just talking about authors that we could, or photographers that we could speak with, and in our Guftgu series, and he's like, "Have you
Yeah.
spoken to Nandita?" And I said, "Nandita Raman, wow!" Like, and then I was like, "I wonder what she's up to." And when I reached out to you, you were actually sitting with prints from the cinema work at that point of time.
Yeah. I was like sitting with this, like this kind of thing, and just working out, just making like some initial selections of what images are certainly a no. And
Right, that very important bit of the image editing process. But
yeah.
maybe we can start with the book that you have completed and done, and that's out there, 1961D, uh, which I only found out very recently about it, and I think maybe it might be a good idea to see like how that project. I mean, I don't want to say project, but that book kind of came into being. Let's just say.
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's sort of like this vicarious method of me seeing you sitting in Delhi and sort of slightly feeling the heat of India,
Yeah.
North India at this time. And
Right.
it's too bad that I was supposed to be in India at this time and I'm not able to. There are other things which are worse than
Right.
a travel plan cancelled. But yeah, no, I'm very, very happy to be part of this conversation and very grateful for the invite.
Happy to be
Uh,
facilitating some chat between you and me right now. I mean, we're just happy to
yeah.
have this conversation here as well.
So for the 1961D book, maybe what I'll start doing is share my screen,
Yep.
and we can go back and forth, unshare or uh, um, yeah, and we can, yeah, it's just a disclaimer for folks, I'm sure we are all quite used to attending these webinars by now. The good that has come out of COVID, it's not really going to be, it's not going to be a seamless process of me kind of switching between things. I don't intend it to be.
Have
I
a
feel
few
like,
mess ups to kind of keep it human, no?
yeah, and there's a kind of value of like to looking at the rough edges of things and
Right.
to let that be out there and to work out things in the open, right,
Right.
with a certain community. So please, please have some patience for me because you'll see me fail a few times. Hopefully not, but you might. So I'll share my screen.
Mhm. I think
And
Saurabh just reminded me that the 1961 was actually part of the Delhi Photo Festival book exhibition into 2013, and
yeah,
I didn't realize that.
curated I believe the book part of it,
Hmm.
and I don't know from where he's sort of like a real detective. He kind of does his detective work and figures out, and he
Those khufia guys, like he's always there and he knows what's going on, but
yeah,
suddenly
yeah,
pop up.
yeah. Because I mean, this book or most of my work, I'm bad at promoting work in general and circulating it. So I was really pleased with that detective work that he did. So the 1961 book is actually really small. It's sort of like
Mhm.
really a palm-sized book. You probably
Right.
see the mirror image,
Yep.
and of course the one of the features of the book is that well, let's start with your question though. The inception of the book, like how did it come about? I was studying in the master's program at BARD ICP, which is International Center for Photography, and there was a short and intensive module on bookmaking, and more than physically making books, which was like a latter part of that. The seminar was more about like ideas and how can ideas become books, or how can you start looking at your images and start using the occasion of the book as a way of creating conversations between different images. So I was sort of in the midst of that, and then Dayanita was actually visiting in New York, and it was this was actually a gift that I made for her on her 50th birthday. So I was like, what can I make? And so I sort of like went back to, I guess this is, I might be sharing a little too much information here.
Go
but I went back to work, which is 1961, correct me if I'm wrong. And I kind of like started looking into that year and figuring out what are the things that happened, and it's a very sort of instinctive stream of consciousness kind of collection of incidences that happened in 1961. So that was the initial impetus to make something that almost sort of contains that history that is part of someone who I'm profoundly grateful for, who's really helped shape my commitment to being an artist. Yeah, and then once I started looking, there are like just so many interesting things that happened. So the cover itself, for instance, is it's a coin which was miscasted. So you see right in the middle, the D, there are two Ds almost, right? So it was sort of like a reject. And so I kind of chose that as a way of, being drawn to things that are dropped off in the periphery, and that we sort of like forget to remember.
Right.
And then when you pick them up, then there's just so much in it that's interesting, and it's so generative. So that was the cover, and then it kind of started. So like some of I kind of intentionally didn't like sit with the book before our conversation, because I also wanted to recollect it as we go. And in that process, so there was a UFO which was sighted in Japan. So it kind of moves the dog that made the first trip into space that year, and kind of goes on sort of in this way of making one connection to the other, and then there's a key at the back. So I'm going to go back and not.
You can keep going back and forth.
Yeah. So there's a key. This is like the last but one page. So it's this page over here, which kind of talks about the different things that the images are of. And then again, the coin, the 5 paisa coin, which has no value now.
Or maybe even more today. I don't know how this idea of valuation works. It's quite, has its own life form.
Yeah. So, And then, like right at the end, is a little excerpt out of Mad magazine, because it was also like the Anita's like humor, which always was so surprising and would break like these very sort of serious conversations. So I wanted to bring in something out of Mad magazine and something kind of weird into the mix.
And they definitely had a little tidbit on that, like it was all trivia things. I mean, I remember when you told me, you said, let's talk about 1961. And I said, okay. And before I even wanted to see what the book was or what the work was about, I was like, let me just write 1961D, on Google and just see what kind of pops up. And it's exactly like this weird, like wide range of like expansion of history making that was going on Google, at that point of time. And I was just thinking, wow, it'd be so cool if it would just be like this kind of an idea. And then I go into the book and I realized that, it actually plays with that whole loosely but strongly connected moments in time that come together in the book as well. And I mean, it's almost in a way that it kind of, because after a while when you're turning the pages, you're also kind of trying to link sections of like one part of the book to the other, and then you almost, I mean, I don't know if it happens with people or not, but you kind of begin to create like these smaller moments of fictional histories for those in between pages, which is really fun for me, at least.
Yeah, the jumps are pretty immense in every couple of pages. There's like this direct kind of storytelling of which is the politician we are looking at. Like I probably needed more caffeine.
Oh, bugger.
Come on, Jackie Kennedy.
Yes.
So Kennedy visited India in 61, and there were all these camps, which were, tents which were made for them, and a toilet was installed, like this sort of like thing that India can do, right, as a historically a colonized country for these foreign delegates and the president of the United States, of course. So there are these moments, and then it kind of like really jumps to something, both in emotion, from something so celebratory to kind of like a reminiscent part of that moment of the Berlin Wall and that, coming up. In 61. So it makes those jumps, and I can't quite say if it's successful in doing that or not, in terms of a strategy. So it is, we could compare it to montage in a way.
Right.
Because it's, it's sort of like really
leaps kind of,
yeah. And it kind of like, it's sort of like a hallucinatory, moment of 10 minutes where you kind of see all of these things. And some of those things are things that I kind of like just went off of, and some of those things felt like things which I could connect to as a peg to when I was thinking of the person I was making this book for. So Goa, for instance, right, and the liberation of Goa from Portugal. This thing of the films, Bollywood films of a certain era, music, which has been really a big part of the interaction that I've had, with the person. And so it's sort of like it kind of goes from things that I associate with the person who I'm sort of speaking with by way of making this book, and then using that as a peg, the furniture design, right? Using that as a peg, portraiture, family portraiture, using those as pegs, and then kind of like really letting myself go.
Right.
So it's, it's, I think it's it was a freeing exercise to do at that point. I have honestly not revisited it for a while. Saurabh, when he asked for the book, was after a while, like that was the time that I revisited it and actually changed the format. So this is the first iteration that I have in my hand, and things changed since then. So for instance, that was the first page. That's the second. It remains kind of similar, but then I changed this one.
Right.
Right. So also like thinking about. So do we have to, when we are revisiting our own work, right? How much of it can we change? How much of it should we keep as it is? And it was 2015, wasn't it? Did he say 2015, Anshika, Saurabh? 13, right, 13.
So, I think that's
so that was like 2 years after I had made the book. And I kind of like, I didn't feel that I had to stick to that initial edition. And that's something that I have generally started to embrace for work in general, that I feel like I don't need to stick to something that I made the way I made it 5 years back. If I revisit it and I feel like I want to add to it, I want to change some things around, then I should do it. It's after all, my work, and the work is coming out of trying to answer certain questions or having a certain kind of conversation. So if the conversation has changed, why should I stick to that one kind of format of it?
Which is actually quite interesting, because usually the book is considered like like once it's done, it's there forever. Like, like this great pressure that's put upon the finality of a book, which I mean often exists. It's nice to hear you kind of move away from that also, because I mean the work in a book is considered like, there is this great pressure that once it goes into a book and once that's printed, then that's it, and that is what you have to say about whether it's a subject or a context that you're referring to, and it holds final in terms of your interpretation or understanding of that idea. So it's I mean I'm quite interested to know how that variation on not allowing that finality to hold you down kind of happens.
Yeah, I think it's also just practically possible because this is handmade. It's it's got a limited number of pages, and every time someone wants it, I have not made all the editions. It's supposed to be an edition of 50, I guess, which is also like handwritten. So maybe I can scribble over it and change the edition as well. So I think part of it is that it's just a handmade book, and so there's a lot of control that I have, and I can keep changing it and keep printing different iterations. It's printed really simply, on a good black and white, not a black and white, like a good laser printer, I guess.
Right.
That makes it possible. But when you publish a book, I would imagine that unless you have a publisher really behind your mad ideas, right? Which is hard to do, and then there is that finality. And I feel like I don't think that there's something. I think that's also a good challenge to take. That there will be a finality, right? And not in a way of like expecting a perfect sequence from yourself, but in a way where you understand that this is where I have to stop, and then it'll become a book, and then I can kind of, that book boundary doesn't mean the end of the work, and then I can continue the work outside the book boundary. It'll just not be that book.
Right.
So it's sort of like, if we could make those sort of different boundaries a bit more permeable for ourselves, and if we don't want to stop working on something and keep changing it around, I
Right.
think just reframing the definition of it and keep changing it around, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think is something, you know, it's I think it's doable. I mean, I'm
I mean, it's
saying this as
definitely
a
freeing to a certain degree, because uh, you realize that you can allow your mind to also then venture into other aspects that come up in the journey of actually finalizing a book. Even sometimes that
mm,
you're like, hey, but these are other ideas that come through, or other uh, like branching out of the same core idea happens a lot as well. And so this kind of helps in allowing that flexibility of even, I don't know, just experimenting with what you're creating later and saying, hey, I want to go back to that. Because even, I mean, in this particular book, it's almost like a time capsule that you create of a timeline, right? Like of 1961, let's just say. And so how one approaches memory becomes very interesting, because that also keeps changing, at different points of time. Different ideas and different issues come to the forefront of your own life and experience. And then what you would search for, or what you would then include in the narrative of the 1961, the book that you were creating, would
mm.
also adapt to a certain degree. I mean, would that happen? Does that?
Yeah. I mean, I think if I were to revisit it, which maybe I'll have an occasion to do next year,
Hmm.
2021, which will be 10 years after, right?
Right.
So maybe it'll become a different book. And I think in all probability it'll probably become a different book, because there's so much more play possible, right? And so if I had to revisit it, um, why would I leave it as it is and change things and have some more fun with it? Yeah, and I mean, there's the one thing that I want to add to the thinking process of the book uh, was sort of bringing in iconic moments
Hmm.
from that year, but also bringing in like really small trivia of a book being misplaced, for instance, which is what
The
this,
library. Yeah.
or like things which are like events which are non-events, which are um, which really are otherwise insignificant, but uh, that's sort of like how most of our like the more part of our lives um, don't really make memorable moments, right? Memorable moments happen when something out of the ordinary happens.
Mm-hmm.
If something fantastic happens, if something terrible happens, if you've had an ordinary day, it's very hard to recollect all the ordinary days that we've had,
Right.
because it's just not. I think it's kind of like when I think of memory, it kind of like is this. You can think of a skin, right? If no scratches happen, then you don't feel that skin. It's just there.
Right.
But if you scratch it, if you put an ornament on it, then it makes you really aware of that skin. So that's how I feel is our memory. And so I kind of wanted to have have all of these things mixed in some ways as a semblance of of our lives, which are construed of both or all of these different um, pitches
Mm-hmm.
of moments that we remember forever, and moments that we don't
We
you
don't.
know
But they
yeah,
come up once in a while, and then you're like, wait a minute, did that
yeah, or
happen?
they're just lived. That's it. There you just have lived it and you'll never remember, and that's how it is.
Right, right. I mean, one of the things actually that I was quite intrigued by was this idea of with 1961. Of course, you were making the book for Dayanita as well, and so there is a person in your mind that you are creating the book for, or you associate the persona or the personality of the book with that individual may be. But that's something that you do for a lot, I mean, as a work process as well, right? Like, I mean, outside of 1961 as well, you mentioned that when you're working on a project or an idea, you end up developing it through developing the relationship with a person who is completely fictional in the dynamics of the project. And I mean, I'm just curious how that impacts the work, or how you begin to how that relationship creates the relationship of your work and you as well.
Yeah, it kind of started with, so, again, going back to the MFA program, like I went in thinking I'm going to learn about photography and other mediums, and it was very clear that it was not only photography centric, right from the onset, because it was chaired by someone who, Nayland Blake, who's a sculptor, and that was something quite attractive for me. But I had not imagined that I'd have to write the amount of writing that I had to do in that program. There were so many moments where I would just stand up exasperated and say, no, I didn't come into a creative writing program. I came into a visual art program.
Right.
So it was just so much effort, and it is different for different people. But I found it very challenging to write, and to write in a way which was closer to where I was, right? Rather than writing, I could write, but I would write in this very sort of philosophical, conceptual kind of way, right? Which was actually not true or genuine, which was able to reach into my thinking process, but it was not necessarily as close to where I was actually making the work from. And so when I was facing that challenge the entire time, and I could recognize it, that this is how my writing is. When I read back, I don't really like it. I don't like this tone, and yet it is, it's not a diaristic I kind of tone that I wanted. It wasn't a personal, in a way, of telling my own story kind of tone that I wanted, but it was a tone that the tone that I was looking for. I wanted no other scaffolding around it. Right. I just wanted to speak. And so once I figured that desire of mine, and I had arrived at that place where I was like, all right, this writing, I'm doing it, I don't like it at all. And I don't have a choice, because our thesis meant that we had to do quite a bit of writing in it. So one of the things that I started doing, which I think Nayland advised me to approach writing in that way, where I started thinking of a person who I'm writing an email to. When I'm writing my artist statement, or when I'm writing the thesis and like thinking through what I'm making, I kind of imagined, but a particular person who was a real person in my life. Okay? A friend, somebody who I knew, who I would have this conversation with, but I wasn't able to have that conversation with. One, either they were not there, or two, I wanted to write down and not have the conversation, right? So I would think that I'm writing an email to the person and write out whatever it was. And it really helped in simplifying the structure, the language, the sentences. They became more spontaneous. They became more, I think they became more genuine. But it's not like I found that at certain point and now I can write really well. I think it's a constant process. When I read what I write now, I feel like it is much better than 5 years back. But I think there's a really long way to go. Yeah.
But it's also interesting that, I mean, when we were having our chat previously that you'd mentioned that even with your students, you tell them to kind of follow a similar idea when they're applying to write for grants or for other
Yeah,
programs that I think, and you said
yeah,
that allows that honesty to come through. And I think that that's actually kind of really important because often we begin to structure what we're writing to suit a current subject that might be in trend, let's say, or I mean, it happens a lot with every medium that
hmm,
you feel like you need to kind of fit in and categorize yourself under this larger, you know, conversation that's going on. And so how you begin to structure your own artist statements or think of your books begins to change because of the structure of writing that also follows in it. So maybe this letter writing just to oneself, even, I mean, or
yeah.
fictional characters, like the ideal person that you'd want to have this conversation with, is a good way for us to even acknowledge and recognize what we want out of that work.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's there are many, there could be many advantages to it. And one of it is, when we sit down to write an artist statement, at least for me, I just stare at that blank screen and I'm like, what am I writing? I don't know. Like, my work is so bad. Like, why should I be even applying to this grant? And like,
Right,
no, like all this resistance that we have
right.
because we don't have a writing practice, right? And so to get past that initial resistance of writing and to just sort of vomit at the page, right? And just start
Right.
writing without judging yourself, without censoring yourself,
Mhm.
and know that you can go back and delete it, erase it, cut it, strike it out.
Many times reduced as one would want later. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that kind of, I think it sometimes helps as a prompt,
Mhm.
as a sort of entering, if we can think of it as a room, right? Rather than entering a very formal gallery room, like entering the Guftgu room, right?
Right.
Entering this conversation room where it's so much more casual, the stakes are low, right? And you
Yeah.
can say whatever you want. And oftentimes, when we actually say whatever we want and the stakes are low, we are actually saying what it is that we really, mean
Yeah.
and believe and do. And so it it has the space, or it has the potential for a more clear real voice, I guess, to come out. And but it oftentimes works for people, and oftentimes it doesn't work for people. It is a strategy out there, though, which I think we as artists who are maybe more engaged with visual forms can kind of adopt
Mhm.
for us to help through and through that resistance to writing.
Right. Are there any odes to forgotten theater chairs or forgotten cinemas that you had going on with the cinema work?
Well, no, but like I have a sticky thing over here on my computer, and it says, "Talk to each photo of body is a situation, and about your biases towards the images, and record the conversation." So I haven't done it yet, but it's a prompt that I gave myself because at some point I kind of was feeling slightly. I felt like I was I'd kind of closed myself in to a corner with that body is a situation work a little bit, and so I wanted a way out, and I felt like I could start talking to the images themselves and look back at how my own notions of the images that I made are becoming um, very strict, and so how can I like shake it up a little bit
Right.
and see if something else comes out of that shaking. I haven't done it, so it might completely fail though. I'm saying all this.
But
Uh,
it'll be an experiment to at least engage with, and even
yeah,
if it doesn't work out, you know that it hasn't worked out, rather than
yeah,
finishing
and it
it
might
somewhere.
not work out now, but who knows? It might work
Yeah.
out
And I
at
guess
some other.
maybe it can have its own manifestation in a completely different journey, with a different medium, maybe, because you
Yeah.
are also dabbling, I mean, not dabbling, you're working with, I mean, still image making, you're working with video, you're working with, multiple formats. And that's
Yeah.
also quite interesting to kind of, to understand where a particular format kind of is able to express what you want to talk about,
Mm. Mm.
as opposed to the other. I mean, how do you navigate working with
Yeah.
different collectively?
Yeah. Like, I think, I think I would say that, like, maybe we can imagine a human body, and, I guess that my spine might still be, I want to say, documentary photography.
Right.
But then, as I think through those initial kind of experiences and what documentary photography brought me to,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of experiences I had in photographing, for instance, the cinema hall work, which was very, very, I can keep sort of, these are really the well circulated images of it. And I apologize, I wasn't really able to bring in all the other images, which will probably become more prominent as in a book format, but they are really low res scans right
No,
now.
no, that's totally fine. I mean,
Um, but so through this point of going to these places, right, and just experiencing these places and people, what started to, I would ask myself, why is it that I'm interested in doing this?
mm-hmm.
And of course, it was the enchantment of making an image, right? And like owning or holding that image, or seeing the world, right? Like seeing the world through images. Um, but what became also, what emerged out of that query was also this fact that I was really interested in how people function, how they are thinking, what are their internal lives, what are their patterns, and if there are some certain patterns, why do they exist? So when I started thinking that, then, and through being, certainly through being in the MFA program, where luckily, we weren't ever required to make things in a certain format. It was sort of like, it was never explicitly said, but it was, it was, everybody knew that we could do whatever we wanted, right? We could work on textile or not make an image, and that's fine. And so I guess there's just that sort of allowing of space, right? That expansion of space, and concurrently getting more and more interested in how our minds work, how do we do things that we do. I started to feel, I guess, more inclined and more attached to the questions that I was asking, or the ideas that I had,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the form of it.
Right.
And so I would follow the trail of the idea or the question, and if it demanded, if it felt that I needed to make an image for it,
Right.
then that felt right, like the right medium. But if I felt like, it needed something more, it needed a more kind of ingrained time-based thing, or there was a certain aspect of continuity that it is demanding, within a certain frame, right? And so video then felt more appropriate. And then also, like, there were moments where, I, as a person who was trying to make these things or resolve these things, needed certain things, right? I needed to be at some point much more physical. For instance, with this work, Bodies of
The body,
Situation,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
where, I guess, there are these bunch of drawings that started to happen. And yeah, I'm not trained in drawing. That's not been my practice. But it just, I was at that moment where I was, where the camera was feeling very mechanical. I just didn't want to, it was just not, it is very physical, but maybe I was just very familiar with it. And I needed to be in an unfamiliar territory, which felt all over again very physical, I guess. So so these drawings sort of emerged out of there, and it is sort of like, it is a bit, it does begin, when it begins, it does feel like you're kind of fondling in the dark, because these are not my mediums, and in a way I'm sort of being naive, right? And like like naively bold, I guess, right? Just like entering into that room of of painters and sculptors, and like, all right, I'm gonna do this now. And I'm aware of that, but I feel like I enjoy it so much as well. And I'm really aware of that enjoyment. And so for me, I feel like at some point I asked myself, what kind of paths do I want to take? Like, if I'm going through all of these different mediums, they have histories, right? And so do I always want to start from the beginning? Like, so if I want to make a sculpture, right? So for instance, so this is the non-seamless part, you folks. I'm going to go really back and forth.
Yeah, this is perfect, because it'll have like 50 questions in my head, and then we'll come back to like resolving one.
So this is, for instance, a sculpture, right? Which is a simple sort of mirror rectangle, which has, so I play with text a lot also, from that place of like being really, really upset and almost like irritated with dealing with text. I really enjoy playing with
It's
text.
become quite a confidant slowly. Like.
Yeah, it's lovely to use language as material. So this one is sort of like a play of words. It's within a finite island, and that's a mirror image of locating that place within the surface of where the object is resting, or in that reflection, right? Because some of the words are mirror images. So within a finite island, there are infinite things. So I was thinking of this as kind of like this mirror object as an island, full of possibilities. Just like how when we are doing projects, right, we have to set up the parameters, and initially they might feel like limitations, but they're actually the most freeing things that we can do to ourselves, right? We can give those set of rules, and then there's infinite play possible. But also it's sort of like slightly utopian, and it feels almost inadequate at this moment where we are facing so many challenges socially, right? And here it was what I was thinking was that there are like all the possibilities, all the potential for change exists all around us always. It's what it takes is looking. And so that was where this came. But so, but then for instance, this mirror sculpture has a huge history in minimalist art. And so when I was making this, I was aware of those connections somewhat. But I think that was the juncture where I asked myself, if I wanted to cross that line, right, without methodically studying the lineages of what I was working with. And the two things that were guiding factors were, one, the excitement of doing something, and that excitement, I kind of recognized it wasn't coming from a trend somewhere outside. It was just something that I just wanted to make something physical. I didn't even care if it was ever shown anywhere or not. So that, and then I kind of like felt that I would rather work out things in the open, right? Like I would rather do the learning of the lineage of a certain medium out in the open.
Through the practice of
Meaning my work is through my practice, meaning my work will show all those things and will also show the stupid naivety that I might have, right? Or the progression and the learning of it. Because I felt like, you know, why should I be doing that learning? And if I want to do that learning by making, why shouldn't I be making, right? So why should I deprive myself from making if that's some of my instinct? And when I really tracked that thinking process, I felt that it was somewhat connected to a market-oriented art practice, where the object always had to be perfect, right? Again, editioned, and the edition never changes. It had to be perfect. It had to be, you know, if it is edition, it had to be replicatable. If it is not editioned, then it had to be non-replicatable. And so when I tracked it down, that, oh, somewhere this whole thinking is actually coming from this idea of the market circulation, not the circulation between friends, but, you know, or between people who love to talk about it, then I felt it was so much more easier for me to drop that, right? To drop that inhibition, or like stepping in and doing these kind of like breaking the rules in sincerely stupid ways, you know, in like these ways where I wasn't necessarily, I just didn't necessarily know of a whole lineage of certain things, right? And so I guess that's, you know, that's something, you know, I admittedly took on in order to have that pleasure of making.
No, I think, and it's that honesty that also allows, I mean, because it seems like for you, the core factor is the process of contextualizing a concern that you have, you know, like whether it starts from an idea or an instance or an individual. It's that, okay, so this is what I want to address, and now the work part of it is actually the journey of arriving at what you feel about it, right? So in that context, then the medium becomes is created by your desire to arrive at your own realization or your own I don't know, closure with an idea in that sense. And so I mean, what makes it, what I'm thinking, I mean, actually when I see this particular work right now, like there's so many political layers of it that are just coming to mind immediately, maybe more so because of the kind of situations that we live in today, and that, you know, I'm suddenly drawing these parallels to political situations within India, but also in the States, you know, for that matter, which is seeing its own well, revolution of it, you know, its own form. And so I was very curious to know whether when you pick up a medium, are you interested in like the political history of that medium as well, you know, because every form has its own kind of like histories, of course, and one is of course the aesthetics and the theoretical part of that history that's related to the creation of that medium itself, but there's also the layers of engagement with that format that come into play. And I mean, it seems of course that you that they manifest in your work a lot, but I mean, I'm curious to know if that aspect ever impacts how you choose to work with certain video or object-based formats, you know, with this work or with some other work that you've also done previously.
I mean, political work, I think, let me think. You know what, I'm going to go back to this so that I can kind of see thumbnails and see, which will help me kind of recollect.
No, even with like, let's say when, I mean, the work that I saw in terms of body is a situation, you know, like the idea of the material with the drawings, or imprints and of the foot form, or even, I mean, sculpturally, of course, there is a whole history there, but with the more what seems like fusion mediums in some ways that you've been working with, where mediums have actually come together, is that something that's happened? And if it hasn't, then that's, I was just curious to know if that's something that plays a conscious role when you're creating work as well.
Yeah, I don't think that I feel like it's more, I think that the cultural notions and the social notions have been catalysts in initiating certain works much more, more than political. But once I'm making the work, it has made me think of and contextualize political things alongside the work. So sometimes making of the work has helped me maybe understand politics, not only in the framework of politics, but bring it and apply it to things in my life or in the vicinity of my life much more.
Right. Like something like blueprints actually used architectural drawings. I haven't seen a lot.
Yeah. So I wanna, I think the two works that speak to that is one of this, which is a, wait, how do I do that? No, not from the beginning. So this is a still of a video, right? And I guess I can play it and talk over it because it's not, it has very quiet sound.
Okay.
So it's a small excerpt that I'm playing of it, and all it is really this model, stone model of a temple, of a temple that is on the banks of Benares, Varanasi, which they are holding up. And these people who are holding this up are the ones who are carving this as a commission for a private garden somewhere in Varanasi. So I kind of like, I knew the person, the sculptor who was commissioned this, and I actually came into this garden just to say hi to him as I was visiting Benares, and saw them doing this work, and I asked these two folks if they would actually hold up this model for me, and that I wanted to make a video of it. And when I was asking them that, I was quite sure that they were going to say no. That we are busy making the thing.
Yeah.
What do you mean by hold this?
For this? Right.
It's so absurd. Like the request felt so absurd, but they did. And when they did, I was shocked because I felt like, so the impetus was not to think about class. The impetus. That's not the impetus of, that's not where the video came from. The video just came as an instinct.
Right.
But while I was doing it and then looking back, when I asked them to hold this up and no other instruction, they held it up. I'm sure it felt like an absurd gesture to them, right? And not only did they hold it, they even asked me if they could put it down.
Right.
And I guess what I read into it was, I was the person with the camera, I was the person who was wearing certain kinds of clothes. There was a reading of class. Although the initial impetus that I had, which hopefully also lurks in here, was that the way they are holding up the stone model is how we hold up our tradition. And it becomes absurd because we don't really do anything with it, right? We
kind of just there in that
sense.
Yeah.
And it becomes all orthodox and absurd. And so like the architectural conventions, the religious, cultural conventions, especially coming from Benares, being a queer person and like really pushing back and fighting with those kind of conventions, right?
Right.
So although the initial impetus was one thing, it just started to become so many other things through making and then through looking back at it. And that's something that's, I would say, happened in this work as well, which kind of initially started from this image taken. It's a fountain in Chandigarh designed by Corbusier. And it was it's a friend's photograph, an artist friend, Kai Walkowiak, who lives in Vienna, and he proposed that we do a two-person exhibition together in Vienna. And this was sort of like I treated this image as kind of like the prompt for me in a way, right? And started thinking about like this notion of city builders and architects who take so many decisions, which actually then begin to shape the lives of people who live their lives in those spaces, right? And navigate those spaces on everyday basis. And I kind of felt that there was a very lopsided equilibrium to it, and that very few people are making decisions for a very large number of people. And so I wanted to use blueprints. So this is actually the Diazo print. It's a blueprint that is now obsolete in some ways with the, with the I think they call it there's still the laser printers, which is where the plans happen. But historically, there were these blueprints, right? So I used the blueprint method, but I started writing on it. And there are these kind of single lines, which I thought of when I was writing these. I wanted them, in trying to frame it, in trying to choose the words and play with the words, I wanted them to sort of be these lines which can resonate in many different ways. If so they don't give, they can almost feel meaningless, but at the same time, if you really think about it, like if they play it too many times in your head, they can start going into all these different directions. So that was one. This is a detail which is the same size. It's 30 by 40, I think.
Okay.
And so if only nothing was missing, if only nothing was missing, if only nothing was missing, right? Like, it's like, why are we making these Chandigarh kind of cities and these kind of utopian places? We still are, right? We are still doing it as a mode of survival for ourselves as well, right? Like there are times in our day when we kind of go into this imaginary place, which is in our own definitions, the perfect place for us to be in. And so I was like, why do we have as humans instinct for this? And that kind of question led me to this line where, there's this feeling of something is missing in what we have now. And that kind of becomes like this prompt of like wanting something else, something different,
right.
something different. And that's sort of like rising and falling kind of feeling. And then this one, which I think is more directly political in ways. So it's kind of like a sandwich. So I projected 5 different images, and they were all of people's movements. So the 377 at the time, this was 2014.
I think 14, 15. I think I remember we met briefly, I think, at one of those pride parades.
Yeah.
At that time.
So it's 377, Tahrir Square, Occupy Wall Street, the umbrella protest in Hong Kong, and one more. So there are these images which are sandwiched together, and then I drew the outlines out in Photoshop, and also projected the image, and then drew some other outlines and kind of made a positive. So how you make a blueprint is you kind of make a positive, kind of like think of it as a slide film, but it's just the same size as the blueprint. And it's whatever you have in there is printed as a positive on the blueprint. So I kind of made this and printed it out, and the what I really wanted to do is fill this blueprint medium, which has plans, right, of
structures and like defined ways of being.
Yeah, fill that up with people and chaos, right, which you can't quite control. So that was what was I guess behind this work.
Right, right. I was just curious about it, which is why I thought I'd slip it in. I know we've been talking for a little over an hour now, and
Okay.
I'm so glad so many people are still on board. But I just wanted to let you guys know, if you have any questions or any inquiries that you want to check with Nandita, I mean, you can just put them in the Q&A section, or you can put them in the chat section, and we can address them. And if not, then maybe we can continue, because I do want to talk to you, even if it's a little bit about the cinema work, and where you're at and how that has changed in many ways and remained the same in some ways. But I know there might be some people here who might also have other commitments, and so if you guys we're definitely going to continue the conversation. It would be great if you guys can stay on and join us, but if not, I do.
Well, maybe what I'll do is I'll stop sharing for a second, and we can just go back to.
So if there are any questions, maybe we can address those. I know we haven't received any yet, but just in case anyone, I just wanted to let them know they can keep putting it. Oh, we do have questions. Okay, Dainita. Dainita is saying no question, but thank you for such a brilliant conversation. The addressee is key. Thanks, Dainita.
Thank you.
So we had that. Maybe what we can do is discuss a little bit on the cinema work, actually, Nandita. And if there's a question that pops up, I can kind of address that to you as we go on.
Yeah. So you were asking in general, like the where is cinema hall work now? Or
Yeah.
Is that?
I mean, yeah, because I mean, when I saw it, you said it's completely different from obviously the version that I saw like a decade ago. And I mean, I also saw, I mean, I saw your PDFs and I saw a bit of the work that's there on your website. And there's a lot of new conversations that have even come up within that. And I know that, I mean, of course, your journey with different mediums has its own role to play in the expansion of the work as well. And I mean, I was curious to understand how one grows along with a project, because this is something that, you know, it's something that you have been following for a really long time. And in the middle, there are other works, a lot of other works that have also come into being. There's books, there's videos, there's sculptural objects that have come into being, and yet there's also the continuation of the photographic work from, I mean, I don't know, is cinema halls how you would still describe it? Because I know there's multiple formats.
No, that's sort of like, I kind of like, it's one project that I feel quite settled with.
Okay.
That I'm settled with it, and and that's probably the reason why I guess I'm, you know, this work was done between 2006 and 9. So it's been a while. We are in 2020, right? 11 years.
Yeah.
And while it remains one of the most circulated works of mine so far, it is certainly a body of work that I ran away from after making it. You know, I kind of like really just ran away from this place of making the cinema hall work, because I just felt too comfortable actually in what I was making and how I was making, and I felt that I needed to do something else. And I don't think I had the idea of what that something else would be. And that's sort of like why actually I came to do the MFA program, thinking that it would be a mode that will allow me to do something else. By the way, if I don't know if there are any,
they are actually, if
there are any younger students or or aspiring
we have a few
folks who want to do MFAs or things like that. The one red flag that I want to share with, and it might not be a red flag for you, but it was for me, was when I was applying to these multiple places. There was one place, a really prominent university, which asked me in an interview, like, what would I be making while in the graduate program? And I had no idea. So I was like, I don't know what I'll be making, but I know for sure that I will not be making cinema halls or anything similar to cinema halls. And one of the committee members told me that, oh, there's a huge Indian diaspora population here in New York. And I stood up from that interview and ran.
Yeah.
Because I felt that I couldn't breathe anymore, and that I felt that I made so much effort to come from India to here, right? To kind of let go of my baggages and my conditionings. And here is someone who's just putting me right back into that.
Right.
And it happens. It happens in many institutions. They have to do it as a way of finding funding, as a way of saying, we have people from India whose thesis is on this and that region in India, and you have people from, I don't know, South Africa, blah, blah, blah. If you want to do that, do it. But if you don't want to do that, don't invest your time and money in an institution that will only put you back in that little hole, right, of who they think you are. It's,
Which
yeah, I
happens a
mean,
lot with photography, even, like there's this whole
everything, totally.
baggage of like where you come from, and then also this preconceived idea of then what India needs to be in one's mind, and therefore the work that gets supported is invariably aspects of that stereotype, and it's very difficult for a lot. I mean, there's maybe one day, you guys will meet and have a conversation, but um, there's a women photographers collective in Burma, and that's one of the things that we're constantly discussing with them, is because everywhere they end up traveling to show their work, and they're meeting curators from outside of the region, the first thing that people kind of address upon them is, hey, so you don't seem like this would, I mean, the work doesn't seem like it belongs to like a Burmese woman photographer. And she's always just like, what do you mean, what belongs to a Burmese woman photographer according to you, who's not engaged with me or with Burma in any way apart from like one history book? And so I mean, it's just something that I know constantly gets put upon as a baggage upon many photographers. Um, can I put in two questions that I know are there at this point of time? One is by Paroma Mukherjee. I don't know if you know Paroma. Ah. So Paroma wanted to know, do you consider memories as objects that need constant reworking, especially when they're fairly personal and feature in work that moves eventually into the public realm?
Can you repeat that question for a
Yeah,
second?
yeah. Do you consider memories as objects that need constant reworking, especially when they're fairly personal and feature in work that moves eventually into the public realm?
I mean, first of all, thank you for that question. I'm kind of like,
Yes, Barry
I think
has a
there's
way
one
with her
aspect of it
question.
of like thinking of memory as an object and not memory as memory. Uh, and that's in itself a translation process right there, right? Like thinking of memory as object. But I think, well, I was very, very curious about memory and how memory functions. Especially when I kind of started this one project, which is called Remembering Absent Meaning. We kind of started with memory, and soon I realized that that memory is something that's not very static. It keeps changing. It changes. It gets reshaped, and we misremember a lot. And we also insert things into memories that we want to remember the way we want to remember. In terms of making, so I feel like that I guess I treat my memories as sort of like a resource for myself to reach in and see if there's something in my own experience that uh, is relevant to what I'm working on. And sometimes it is, especially sensorial experiences of that remain as part of my memory, which can propel a work. Something that I'm doing right now is related to that, but it's just too soon for me to talk about it. So yeah, a little bit of the memory and reaching in and using memory as a resource for sure. But memory as an object is I guess less appealing for me because I personally don't have a very good relationship with nostalgia. I find nostalgia weighing me down, and it's something, it's sort of like something like the video that I shared. I feel nostalgia is something that situates us in the past, and it becomes like this hurdle to continue to be in the present and continue to work through things. That's my personal take, and I'm sure that there are many different ways of thinking about nostalgia. And so for that reason, I try not to make objects, I guess, out of memory and give it that kind of stasis. And for the personal into the public, right? That's the other aspect of the question. Yeah, I guess I would just re-quote one of my professors and an artist that I look up to quite a bit, which is Amoira Devi. And she has used this line in her videos and her writings where she quotes from an interview of Fassbender, the filmmaker, where he says that the more, I think, I'm doing a bad paraphrasing, so apologies for that, but I think he says something like, the more personal you get, the more universal you get. So the more people are actually able to relate to you, the more personal you get. And by personal, he's again not, I'm thinking, the way I'm reading that is that he's not necessarily meaning that this happened to me and I did this, but more coming from that place of personal experience and speaking from that place of personal experience, rather than, rather than sort of making that experience into something like a separated framework of certain kind of logic, whether it's a philosophical logic or a social logic, whatever other logic we have at hand. So I think that it demands a huge amount of strength from anyone who is bringing out the personal and is getting ready to let it live in the world. But I think those demands are worthwhile, is my feeling, if you feel up to it. And sometimes, it becomes a way for us, for the people, right, who are practicing and making this personal bringing it into public, to actually relearn these realities and look at them in ways that we may not have looked at before. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
I think so, but yes, I mean, for me, it's definitely answered quite a few questions I had even otherwise. There's another question by someone who wanted to know, how do you start a project? Is it with single images, or do you have a preconceived idea of making it into a body of work? I mean, I think it's interesting to talk about the idea of starting a project. Like, do you know
Right.
it's a project already, or?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that question. No, I don't think I really work in projects. There are definitely some prompts. Sometimes, friends would give me a prompt, uh, like the blueprints that I shared, right? Let's do a 2-person exhibition, right? And so, but that was the project, if we can call it a project. But what would it be about? We started from that place where we didn't quite know.
Right.
But I guess I'm sort of like just making, and through that making, at some point, an image or a drawing, a scribble even really becomes very loud or starts to speak in a pitch which is different from all the others, and it kind of, I just have to listen to it, and if I'm able to listen to it, I start to follow it, and it starts to follow me. I guess there's that thing that happens where it kind of becomes its own thing, and I kind of hesitate to call it project, because project feels like so drab and boring, right? Like, I'm doing a project. Oh,
like you're in a prison cell with like, isko khatam karo.
Yeah. Just for that reason, I'm not opposed to doing things in project, but that term feels to me like someone's trying to discipline me and make me do something, and I hate being made to do something, I guess. So yeah, so that's sort of like how it happens, and then I just have to then there are some things that kind of become their thing, that then eventually, how does it start? What triggers you? I just opened the panel too. So
nice.
okay, so how does it start? Let me talk about a work that I'm doing right now. We are in 20, right? So last year, or late 2018, I had a baby. And what that meant was, between me and my partner who are caring for this infant, or at that time an infant, it meant that my pragmatic structures of time were very specific, right? So there were demands from that person, that baby, and there was no talking out of it. I couldn't really use logic, right? Babies, thankfully, don't understand that. So one of the things that started happening was that I had to strap her onto me, in this baby carrier, and walk around the neighborhood, because that was the only way she would sleep in the day. So those sort of walks started a lot, and at some point the urge to make something started, or just to see more, right? What can I do? Okay, all right, this is my parameter. What can I do here? And I started noticing tree stumps, a lot of trees which were cut, and they kind of, on several walks, it just became louder and louder and louder for me. I just couldn't get those tree stumps out of my mind long after the walk was done. And so I just kind of started going back to them and photographing, and it was doable for me. It was all in my neighborhood, and I made that as a parameter, that I'll only photograph tree stumps in my neighborhood. And then just started asking questions of that act of photographing it, and of what the tree stumps are. And it's becoming something now. And that's so that's one example of how it started. It certainly starts from somewhere from that place of wanting to do something about it, right? Like not just experience the world around you as it is and just witness it, but in that witnessing, wanting to make something, like do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
That for sure is that moment of making. Whether it becomes something or it remains, in a box somewhere,
Right.
is the latter part. So,
Right. And I mean,
and,
do you
yeah.
also have triggers that come in from, I don't know, I mean, because I know you're reading and engaging with other mediums a lot also, you know, and also how scenarios around you change, I mean, politically, economically, socially.
Yeah.
Often I mean, are those triggers something, I mean, are they certain kinds of, let's say, text that you were
Mhm.
open to more for, or certain kinds of cinema that you kind of look at for, stimulants or triggers, even when you're in the process of making your own work?
Yeah. I mean, there are certain inclinations that I have recognized within me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are times when, there are times when I want to work with those inclinations, and there's times when I want to work against those. But yeah, I mean, like the body is a situation
Mm-hmm.
work came out of just, again, not doing any work, but just reading. And I started reading, I think Allen Ginsberg's India Journals was the first one.
Okay.
And I was traveling in Mexico at that point, in 15 or 16, and reading the journal. And I especially wanted to read the India Journals not in India, and be away from there. And so, just the language of it, the sort of back and forth of trying to understand whatever it was that Ginsberg was experiencing through his travels in Banaras and Calcutta, his dialogue with other, poets, practitioners, and, his explicit language of him on various kinds of drugs and high, right? Like the nonsensical and yet like sometimes very profound, those kind of places that happened. It just was it drew me in. And so I became really curious and started to seek more consciously what were the other journals that existed of people who had gone to travel to India. So that was, that's one example of reading. And then now what I'm reading sort of loosely for it is, I guess I'm reading Alice Boner's diary again. Again, this is published diaries. Some works about decolonization and trying to understand that a little bit. But I do like books. I think I might have a slight fetish for it. The reason I call it fetish is because I don't think I've read nearly all the books that I have, but I have them. So it feels like slightly
a growing
like
collection of books to read slowly.
Yeah, and the thing about that, which I find quite lovely, is that I can just sit and then want to feel, I want to read a Shahid Ali poetry, and I can just go reach for it and read it.
Right.
And there's a satisfaction in that, which I'm still working on finding that same sort of satisfaction through, going through the internet, which is a huge, open, available library. But I haven't yet found my way with it. So reading, I like reading quite a bit. Like early on, again, going back to the Anita, the first time I met her, the first thing she told me was, how much reading do you do? And I don't remember my answer, but I remember what she told me. She was like, you have to read 2 hours every day.
Right.
And it was like nobody had ever told me that. And I was like, wow, 2 hours every day, that's a lot. And I don't think I nearly read that much, but I did start reading. I did start paying attention and reading a bit. And I really have enjoyed it, actually. It's something I quite enjoy as a way, as sort of like a passport to reach, all these different terrains and places, just sitting wherever, where you're sitting.
Right.
So
I mean, and I mean, I think the fascinating thing is also, I mean, of course, you're transported into the world of that's within the book, but the world that's within the book, if it's a text-based book, I think can also be a different world every time that you pick it up. I mean, it happens a lot with me when I've read a book when I'm really young, and then I've read it when I was like, going late into my teens, and I'll pick it up now, like I have three, distinct worlds that are kind of running parallel into the same storyline, and it's quite
true, right? Through the same, while the book remains the same, and maybe you're
yeah,
reading.
yeah. It completely changes, and also what you imagine, visually what you imagine with the book, because I think that's how I end up reading it. Like for me, when I read, I can't have anyone read out to me because that
Mm.
kind of become like the background, and actually what's going on is here. So the worlds
Yeah,
here keep changing. They're just like the environments change, the facial, the faces and the structures of like how those worlds are made keep changing. So it's quite fun. And I mean, when you were talking about books that are waiting on the shelves to be picked up, I think I have quite a few of those as well. But I like to believe that, I mean, there's that one day when you really need that book to be the first time that you read it, and that's when you kind of you know you
yeah,
you make that connection open by making sure you have that book, and
yeah,
then one day is going to be the right day to pick it up. And
yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think books have actually come to my rescue at times when I've been stuck with projects too. Uh, so, yeah, I think, Bodies a Situation, that title kind of comes out of a book, an essay that Ricky Williams wrote in this anthology of essays on gender queer. Um, and I was just trying to the context of Banaras can feel so far removed from a queer framework, right? That I was sort of like trying to push them closer, but they were not. They were really just like falling apart for me the entire time, and I didn't know how to place myself somewhere
right.
where I was also connected to this and that. And I just started reading those essays and some things that kind of roped it all together. So they have come to my rescue.
I know we're kind of hitting an hour and a half now, and it's been so amazing to actually just have this chat. I'm like, I'm quite happy to go on, but I have a feeling people are just going to be like, what's going
Yeah.
on? But maybe we can quickly come back into the cinema work, and just briefly, if you
Oh
could.
yeah. I'm sorry. The question that you asked has remained
No, it's
unanswered.
fine. I'd forgotten it as well. Suddenly, I had this trigger for like 8:30, and I was like, oh wait, is it 8:30? Um, then Anita's happy to stay on, so maybe the three. I know Adil is going to stay on as well, and maybe we can just continue our chat. And those who want
Yeah.
to kind of move forward, and I'm sure have commitments, and
Yeah.
they can go ahead. But should we come back into the
Yeah.
cinema
Yeah.
work
Let's
and
do it.
see?
Sorry. I think
No,
I
no, no.
just.
This is, like I said, there's no structure. It is a Guftgu, so it has to. I'm happy that it is taking on, its
You're
own.
making it very hard for me because then I don't know what to push against. Right?
You
Keeping
don't
all
have
this
to push against
away,
anything.
and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh.
But let's get into the cinema work and where it's at now. Let's just start from there and maybe
Yeah.
get back.
Yeah. It's hold on just 1 second. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's so after making it, and it's being exhibited in different places, and um, oftentimes many people and people who uh, whose voice I rely on
Mm-hmm.
have come back to me and said you should make a book this work. This work needs to live as a book. But most times I just found myself really more curious and preoccupied with whatever it was that I was doing at hand. And I just didn't really feel up to making a book of the work which felt in some ways closed and unresolved. But I also realized while it was being exhibited in different places, I also realized the specificity of a certain form that happens in gallery spaces and museum spaces. And when I was working towards those exhibitions, these are some shows which came up, I think I want to say 2017 and 18 in George Eastman, and then Museum of Moving Images. So for those exhibitions, it was kind of like a reason for me to look back and go through the cinema hall archives. And I saw so many images at that point, which I felt like these are really interesting images, and I can't believe I was taking them at that point, because I feel like there's so many, they're almost like these schizophrenic existence of ourselves, right? So I felt that I was taking these images and I was this one person, very open and photographing these things and seeing these things and witnessing these things. And then when I came to the editing table, I was really a beginner at reading images, and didn't have the sophistication or the dictionary that is needed, right, to recontextualize your own images that you've made, which have come out of really spontaneous looking and and taking. So the editing, I think, of the work has some remains of me being a beginner and learning photography through making the cinema hall work. The edit which now circulates in museums and galleries. And having looked at and found those other images, I found myself like thinking about so many other things that I could see in them now. So it's almost like working with actually someone else's work, like working with an archive.
With an archive, right.
It's now so far back that I don't necessarily feel very attached to these images at all. And I can be very cruel with them, don't care for them. Right. And that's actually is helpful in some ways. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm looking at, so I've made, first of all, I kind of like went in to a broader selection, printed them out really small so I could play with them. Right. And that became like a really good reason to think about the book. And also to think about text that could go with the book. Right? And so like very early on, I knew that it wasn't a photo book necessarily, right? The
like traditional,
that I was interested in, although the work in some ways is very conventional, in the way it's framed, the way it's photographed. But that mode is not appealing. So what kind of text do I want to converse with these images is another, I guess, a puzzle, interesting puzzle to solve. And I think I'm leaning towards anecdotal stuff, people who have ongoing relationships with going to watch films in India. And there's some really fantastic anecdotes that I've chanced upon, luckily. But other than that, what I'm doing is like sitting with these files of images and trying to make relationships or find relationships that can can happen, and kind of making one of the ways I work is to write keywords down as kind of as sort of like placeholders of certain trails of ideas. And so I have like a little thing where I can't really, it's a big computer, I can't really turn it around.
Right.
You all to see it, but I have like this little poster where I'm writing keywords. And one thing that's like really at the moment very appealing to me is sleepers, like that, because in India we knew, at least not in multiplexes, but on all these single screen theaters where the tickets were cheap, like Excelsior in Chowri Bazaar, right? I would go there and I'd meet like so many of these audience folks, and I'd ask them, why do you, like, you know, me with my own notion, right? Why do you come to see this film over and over again?
Yeah.
Right? Kota Sikka. Why do you come and see Kota Sikka over and over again? Thinking
it's the
there's
film.
something in the film.
Right.
But it was really the fan and the cool atmosphere that this guy who was otherwise working as a daily laborer, you know, and could afford like 3 rupee tickets and sit under the fan and actually sleep. So I photographed, not inside the auditorium, but I did happen to photograph some sleepers within the cinema hall space, and then chanced upon this one. I mean, and then cinema as an escape is a well-established notion, right? Right. Especially if you think of Bollywood cinema. But then I chanced upon this essay that Roland Barthes had written. It's called "Leaving the Theater," I think, where he talks about hypnosis and this like the significant moment that he describes, and I'm happy to share the title of it in the chat.
That would be really,
for sure. He describes this moment before the film has started, and that sort of anticipation of going away from the familiar into this separate architectural space, which then is dark. And he kind of describes the body and how it goes kind of limp like this, right?
Yeah.
And you sort of like are not performing anymore, and you're sort of like just in that place of being. And those things, they were like little sparks in my head, and I was like, wow, yeah, it just spoke to the experience of watching cinema, right? In such a true way. That so I kind of like, you know, I'm still editing it, but this is
yes, we can see.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a quick sequence at the moment. For instance, I mean, oops, I dropped.
Okay. Yeah, this is
So, like creating a certain space or I don't know, a zone, right, where we can exist. And it's almost kind of like the images are situated in the cinema hall, but they are not functioning as a description of the place. And I think that might be, if I'm able to, with whatever I have in terms of what I shot, if I'm able to, that's what I'd like to do, is to create all these different things that happen inside the cinema hall, but they don't necessarily describe it. So yeah, sleepers is one. Repair is another. This thing of, you know, of the repair culture that we've lost completely, and it coincides with the advent of multiplexes in India, because that's when, you know, our economy opened up, and the middle class aspirations became what they became, and we kind of lost that whole culture of repairing things, right? Like, so, like, instead of let's see if I can find it real quick. What's the sequence? So, oops, did I do something? Shit, are you still there?
I can see you. Yeah, you're still here, and we can see you.
Okay. So, you know, keeping things that storage, right, of redundant things, of repairing the possible potential. This is, this is in the edit as well.
Yeah, I remember seeing.
Extrapolated out of that edit. So, kind of like thinking, all the people with the know-how of repairing, right? So it's kind of, it's too soon to say what it will become, because I'm really just about starting and familiarizing myself with the images. But that's my desire, for it to become something that's situated in the cinema hall place, that then speaks to, in some ways, like the 1961D, right? Like speaks to that time capsule, like the place, context in which those theaters existed, and the culture around it.
No, and it's quite interesting. I mean, I'm like you mentioned, going back into that, that timeline of now going back to the images, and the images already exist. It's the archive, but it's the person who photographed it now becoming the outsider of, in some ways, to that idea and to that project, and then re-dissecting it, I guess, with the other contexts that now concern you, also. And I wonder if at this point, I know you mentioned that it's already kind of, the photography aspect of it is completed in some ways. But do you look back at this, and then do you look at it as an archive that needs to be reinterpreted, maybe, based on where you are today? Or do you also think that you want to add to this archive today?
Yeah, I think, and I would add to that question, one more aspect of it is do I want to, because the initial motivation is so familiar, because I was the one making, I happen to be the one who was making these images also, right? So do I want to be true to that motivation, or do I want to occupy the space now, right? And Mark, who's, I can see, is one of the attendees. We had a short conversation, and he was like, well, you can be both, actually. You can be that person who is making it, and be really aware of those intentions, and also speak from here, or make from here, right? And so it's easier said than done, of course, but it's, I think the way I can be true to those motivations and intentions is by not adding more images and making more images now, and yet, like, reframing and making new relationships within these images. And it kind of selfishly serves another purpose of me not having to go back to these places and photograph.
I mean, I don't even know how many of these places would continue to exist as
very few, unfortunately. There was a time when I really wanted to reach out to the projectionists who I photographed for this work, and there were a lot of projectionists. I mean, projector room was the place where I spent the most amount of time chatting with the projectionists, and unfortunately, 85% of them were dead. So I do think that a lot of these places don't exist anymore. Most places I photographed were still running in whatever condition. There were only 2 closed theaters that I photographed. I was not interested.
And you photographed mostly, I mean, I know Calcutta was also there, but then Banaras is where it had...
Calcutta, Banaras, and Delhi.
Right. Mark has a question that I'm sure you've already read, and I think it will be...
No, I haven't read it.
Oh, okay. So Mark actually wanted to know, if I didn't understand wrong, were you not saying that you do not subscribe to the idea of nostalgia? And if not, where do you place what I see is a hint of nostalgia in the cinema works?
Thanks, Mark. So you're scratching that place which is super sensitive. No, I actually don't subscribe to the idea of nostalgia, or at least that's what I make myself believe that I don't. In my conscious mind, I feel really at odds with nostalgia for that one reason, that I feel like, damn, nostalgia always brings us, it makes us go backwards, and backwards for me means all those conventions and traditions and religion and all of that shit, right? I'm sorry for the language, but all of those things which have brought us to this place where we are, which kind of construct the conditionings. Although uh, although it's us who are retaining on to those conditions, but we are also retaining on to nostalgia. So no, I don't subscribe to nostalgia, and I think, from how I look at these images, although they're black and white, and in some ways they consider the architecture and the equipment and the people. I would say that they're sort of like very well considered framing of the architecture of the people, of the equipment, right, inside the cinema hall spaces, and they are black and white, and black and white sort of like makes us sort of think of the past. I don't necessarily actually think of these as nostalgic, and I might be sort of like forcing, I guess, that kind of filter onto it, so that I can survive through this project while still holding on to this annoyance with
right.
Yeah, and I want to say also that I think my sentiments for nostalgia have changed a little bit. They have definitely loosened up. They're much more. I guess I'm less upset with it than I was 5 or 7 years back. But yeah.
Just curious, what helped or caused the loosening of the nostalgia barriers?
I just adding more time in my life on the planet, I guess, and sort of also realizing that that the it's not this or that. That's the way. It's not either or, which is the way. It's usually like a really dirty gray mix of things. Yeah, and so sort of like, even if I'm not drawn to it, I realize that it might be seeping into things, which I do and how I function in life. This desire for going back home. I want to go to Banaras. Is that nostalgia, or is that sort of wanting to be in a familiar place? Always, can I kind of make very clear distinctions between them? Always. And so I guess just sort of realizing that things are not all so well defined and clear, and that has helped me loosen up a little bit.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we might wrap it up here, but it was really amazing to have this conversation, and I'm sure I'm going to plot more ways in which I can have more such conversations. I mean, with you, of course, but also get you to have more of these conversations with a whole bunch of photographers out here, because I think it would be really amazing. Thank you for sharing so much of your work, your process, your...
It's a pleasure. It really is a pleasure. I'm really happy that, right at the beginning, we acknowledged that, we have things to be grateful to COVID for. And really thank you for reaching out. And
This is just the beginning, Nandita. Wait. You